Man insults Keanu Reeves on a first-class flight, instantly regrets it when the truth is revealed. The first-class cabin of flight UA-857 from San Francisco to New York hummed with the quiet efficiency that money could buy. Flight attendants moved with practiced grace, offering champagne and hot towels to passengers settling into their spacious seats. The cabin smelled of leather, subtle cologne, and the particular blend of excitement and entitlement that comes with premium air travel. In seat 3A sat Marcus Whitley, a 42-year-old tech executive fresh off closing a major acquisition deal. His custom Tom Ford suit announced his success as clearly as the Rolex Submariner on his wrist. He sipped his pre-departure champagne while scrolling through emails on his phone, occasionally glancing up to survey his fellow passengers with the casual assessment of someone accustomed to ranking others by their apparent worth. When the man in seat 3C boarded, Marcus barely looked up. The newcomer wore faded jeans, a simple black t-shirt underneath a worn blazer, and scuffed motorcycle boots. His shoulder-length dark hair was slightly disheveled, and a sparse beard covered his face. He carried a worn leather messenger bag and moved with unhurried confidence. "Excuse me," the man said in a soft, deep voice as he navigated to his seat across the aisle from Marcus. Marcus gave a curt nod without fully looking up from his phone. In his peripheral vision, he categorized the man as someone who didn't belong in first class, perhaps an employee upgraded due to the flight being oversold, or someone who had used points to splurge on a one-time luxury. The flight attendant approached the man with the same professional smile she had offered Marcus minutes earlier. "Good afternoon, sir. May I take your jacket? Would you care for a pre-departure beverage?" "No, thank you on the jacket," the man replied with genuine warmth. "But some water would be great, thank you." "Just water?" Marcus muttered under his breath, but loud enough to be heard. The man turned toward Marcus with a slight, curious tilt of his head, but said nothing as he accepted the water from the attendant with a gracious "thank you." Marcus returned to his emails as the cabin continued to fill. The carefully curated playlist of classical music in his AirPods insulated him from the ambient sounds of boarding. Only when the captain announced they were preparing for departure did he remove them and reluctantly power down his phone. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Marcus noticed the man in 3C had opened a worn paperback, Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day, rather than using an e-reader or tablet. Another mark against him in Marcus's silent accounting. "Good book?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting he doubted it. The man looked up with a genuine smile. "One of my favorites. Have you read it?" "I don't have much time for fiction these days," Marcus replied. "Too busy creating real value in the world." Instead of the defensive response Marcus expected, the man nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. We all have different paths. I find fiction helps me understand people better, though. It builds empathy." Marcus scoffed lightly. "Empathy doesn't close deals." "Perhaps not directly," the man conceded with an unruffled shrug, "but it might make the deals worth more." Before Marcus could respond, the flight attendant appeared to take their dinner orders. Marcus chose the filet mignon with a glass of the Cabernet, while the long-haired man opted for the vegetarian option and another water. "No wine with dinner?" Marcus couldn't help asking after the attendant moved on. "They've got some decent bottles in first class. Might as well enjoy the perks." The man smiled again, seemingly unbothered by Marcus's tone. "I'm sure they're excellent. I'm just not drinking today." "Recovery program?" Marcus asked with raised eyebrows. "No," the man replied simply, without elaboration or defensiveness. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Marcus found himself inexplicably irritated by the man's calm demeanor. There was something about his quiet confidence that seemed unearned compared to Marcus's own hard-won success. When their meals arrived, Marcus watched with barely concealed disdain as the man thanked each crew member by name, having apparently paid attention during their introductions. The flight attendant named Sarah lingered, chatting briefly about the book he was reading. "Making friends with the help?" Marcus commented after she left. The man looked at him with curious eyes. "They're people doing their jobs, often while dealing with difficult passengers. A little kindness costs nothing." "Spoken like someone who doesn't pay for premium service very often," Marcus replied. "When you're paying what these seats cost, You're not paying for friendship. You're paying for efficiency. Is that what you're getting? Efficiency? The man gestured to the cabin around them. Seems to me we're all arriving at the same time, regardless of which section we sit in. Marcus cut into his steak with more force than necessary. We're arriving at the same time, but not in the same condition. That matters when you have important meetings waiting for you. Some of us can't afford to waste time recovering from being crammed into economy. What do you do that's so important, if you don't mind me asking? The man's question held genuine curiosity without a trace of the defensiveness or intimidation Marcus was accustomed to provoking. I run acquisitions for Vertex Technologies, Marcus said, dropping the name of his prominent firm with practiced casualness. We just closed a deal absorbing a promising AI startup, $300 million. I'm heading to New York to begin integration planning. Congratulations, the man said, seeming sincere. That sounds challenging. It is, Marcus agreed, surprised to find himself continuing. We'll be cutting about 40% of their staff, but it's necessary. Their algorithms are groundbreaking, but their business model was unsustainable. The man nodded thoughtfully. That's a lot of people losing their jobs. That's business, Marcus said firmly. The technology will eventually create more jobs than it eliminates. You have to look at the bigger picture. The bigger picture still contains individual people with families and bills, the man observed quietly. I wonder if there's a way to honor both. Marcus felt his irritation returning. Look, what do you do? Because giving business advice without skin in the game is pretty easy. The man seemed to consider the question carefully before answering. I work in film, mostly. Some other projects on the side. Film? Marcus raised an eyebrow, like you're a director or something. Sometimes I'm in front of the camera, sometimes behind it, the man said with a small, self-deprecating shrug. I try to contribute where I can. Marcus smirked. So you're what? An extra? A grip? One of those guys who stand around holding light reflectors? For the first time, the man's smile dimmed slightly, though his voice remained even. I've done various jobs. The people holding reflectors work incredibly hard, by the way. 12, sometimes 14-hour days in all weather conditions. I'm sure they do, Marcus said dismissively. But we all make choices. I worked 80-hour weeks for years to get where I am. Nobody handed me anything. The man nodded. That's impressive dedication, though I've found that most success stories involve both hard work and good fortune. I've been very lucky. Lucky, Marcus repeated with a slight sneer. That's what people say when they don't want to admit others simply worked harder or smarter than they did. Perhaps sometimes, the man acknowledged, but acknowledging luck or privilege or timing or connections doesn't diminish achievement. It just humanizes it. Their conversation was interrupted as the flight attendant cleared their dinner trays. Marcus ordered a scotch, while his seatmate requested a tea. So what brings you to New York? Marcus asked, finding himself curious despite his irritation. Auditioning for a commercial or something? The man chuckled softly. No, nothing like that. I'm actually meeting with some people about a foundation I support. We work with children's hospitals. Tax write-off? Marcus asked. For the first time, the man's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger, quickly controlled. No, it's personal. My sister had leukemia when we were young. Marcus felt a rare flicker of shame. I'm sorry to hear that. Is she... She survived, the man said, his voice softening. She's well now, but those experiences stay with you. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Marcus sipped his scotch, annoyed with himself for feeling chastened. Look, Marcus said after a moment, I may have been a bit harsh. Long day, high-pressure job. You know how it is. No apology needed, the man said. We're all just trying to get through our days the best we can. Something about the simple grace of this response irritated Marcus all over again. Who was this shabby-looking guy to be so magnanimous? Though I have to ask, Marcus said, unable to stop himself. How does someone in your position afford first class? These seats run about $8,000 one way. Instead of appearing embarrassed, the man simply looked thoughtful. I've been fortunate in my career, but you know, sometimes the things that matter most don't come with a price tag. That's the kind of thing people say when they can't afford the price tag, Marcus replied with a short laugh. The man didn't respond immediately. taking a sip of his tea instead. When he spoke, his voice was contemplative rather than defensive. I've had times in my life when I had very little money, and times when I had more than I needed. I can honestly say my happiness wasn't directly correlated with my bank balance. Easy to say when you're sitting in first class, Marcus countered. True, the man acknowledged with a small smile, though I was perfectly happy in economy too. Their conversation might have continued in this vein, but they were interrupted by a young flight attendant, Jason, according to his name tag, who approached with a slightly nervous expression. "I'm so sorry to intrude," Jason said, addressing the long-haired man, "but I just wanted to say that The Lake House is my mom's favorite movie. She watches it every Mother's Day. It would mean the world to her if I could get your autograph." Marcus looked between the flight attendant and his seatmate in confusion as the man smiled warmly. "I'd be happy to," he said, taking the cocktail napkin and pen Jason offered. "What's your mom's name?" "Eleanor," Jason replied, watching with barely contained excitement as the man wrote a personalized message and signed it. "Thank you so much, Mr. Reeves," Jason said, carefully folding the napkin. "This will make her year." As the flight attendant moved away, Marcus stared at the man with dawning recognition. The pieces suddenly fell into place. The long hair, the beard, the quiet demeanor. Sitting across from him was Keanu Reeves, one of Hollywood's most recognizable and beloved actors. Marcus began, his voice faltering. "Keanu," the man said simply, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you officially, Marcus." Marcus shook his hand automatically, his mind racing. He'd spent the last 2 hours condescending to and belittling Keanu Reeves, star of The Matrix, John Wick, and countless other blockbusters, a man worth hundreds of millions who was famously one of the most genuine and generous people in Hollywood. I didn't recognize you," Marcus managed to say, feeling heat rise in his face. "No reason you should have," Keanu replied easily. "I'm not dressed for a premiere. I'm sorry about—" Marcus gestured vaguely, encompassing their entire prior conversation. "Don't worry about it," Keanu said. "Actually, I appreciate when people talk to me normally. It's refreshing." "Normal isn't usually me being an ass," Marcus admitted. Keanu smiled. "We all have our moments. Long flights can be stressful." There was no condescension in his voice, no triumph at Marcus's discomfort, just the same genuine attention he'd shown throughout their conversation. Marcus sat back in his seat, reassessing everything about their interaction. This man, who could easily afford to buy the entire first-class cabin many times over, had sat quietly reading a paperback, drinking water, and enduring Marcus's arrogance without once pulling rank or status. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said after a moment. "Of course," Keanu replied. "Why didn't you just tell me who you were when I started, Keanu considered this. "Would it have changed anything meaningful about our conversation, the points either of us were making?" "It would have changed how I spoke to you," Marcus admitted. "That's exactly why," Keanu said gently. "I'd rather have an honest conversation, even an occasionally uncomfortable one, than have someone perform politeness because of my job." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "I think I've been performing most of my life. The watch, the suit, it's all signaling, isn't it? Trying to make sure people know who I am, or who I think I am, before I even open my mouth." "We all signal in different ways," Keanu said. "There's nothing inherently wrong with nice things. But there's something wrong with judging others for not having them," Marcus finished. "Or for not caring about them." "That's not for me to say," Keanu replied. "But I've found life is richer when I try to understand people's choices rather than judge them." For the remainder of the flight, they talked with a new openness. Marcus found himself sharing concerns about his company's culture that he'd never voiced aloud before. Keanu listened attentively, occasionally offering perspectives that were thoughtful without being prescriptive. As the plane began its descent into New York, Marcus found himself reluctant for the conversation to end. "I've learned more in 5 hours than in my last 5 executive retreats," he admitted. Keanu smiled. Conversations without agendas can do that sometimes. When they landed and the seatbelt sign turned off, Marcus realized something important. "I never asked about your sister's foundation. What's it called? I'd like to contribute." "The Patricia Reeves Children's Foundation," Keanu said, "but don't feel obligated." I don't, Marcus replied honestly. For once, I want to do something that isn't about obligation or appearance. As they collected their bags from the overhead compartments, Marcus noticed several passengers now recognizing Keanu, nudging each other and whispering. Yet Keanu maintained the same unaffected demeanor he'd shown throughout the flight, thanking the crew members by name as he exited. In the jetway, they paused to say goodbye. "It was good talking with you, Marcus," Keanu said, extending his hand again. "Likewise," Marcus replied, feeling the inadequacy of the word. "And I really am sorry about earlier." "Life's too short for regrets," Keanu said. "Just pay it forward sometime. See someone beyond your first impression." With a final smile and nod, Keanu continued down the jetway, stopping briefly to take a photo with a young fan, his patience and kindness evident even from a distance. Marcus stood watching for a moment, suddenly aware of how differently he would have treated that same young fan mere hours ago. The dismissive brush-off, the irritated sigh, the performative importance. As he finally turned to continue into the terminal, Marcus took out his phone. Instead of immediately checking his emails as he'd planned, he opened his calendar and found the upcoming quarterly review where layoff decisions for the newly acquired company would be finalized. He created a new appointment the day before: explore alternatives to 40% staff reduction. It was a small thing, perhaps, but as Keanu had gently suggested, the bigger picture was made up of individual people. It was time to look more closely. As Marcus headed toward the exit, he noticed that the usual post-flight urgency he felt, the need to rush, to assert his place at the front of every line and interaction, had quieted. The people around him were no longer obstacles or background characters, but individuals with their own stories and struggles. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Marcus Whitley found himself simply walking, present in the moment, seeing the humanity around him, all because a man in worn boots and a simple t-shirt had shown him the same courtesy. The conference room at Vertex Technologies fell silent as Marcus finished his presentation. "So instead of the planned 40% reduction," he concluded, "we've reassigned 25% of the acquired staff to our innovation lab, retrained 15% for our customer success team, and only had to let go of 8 employees, all of whom received 6 months severance and job placement services." The CFO leaned forward. "And the quarterly numbers?" Marcus advanced to the final slide. "Integration costs were 12% higher than projected, but we're already seeing unexpected benefits. Employee retention is up across both companies, and 3 of the reassigned engineers have filed provisional patents that our legal team believes have significant market potential." After the meeting, his colleague James fell into step beside him in the hallway. "Got to say, Marcus, you've been different since that New York trip. Good different, but I hardly recognize you sometimes." Marcus smiled. "Let's just say I had a humbling experience with an excellent teacher." That evening, as Marcus packed for his next business trip, he carefully placed Kazuo Shiguro's The Remains of the Day in his carry-on, the same copy that had been pressed into his hands as they'd parted at the airport, with a simple inscription on the first page: "The greatest dignity to be found in life lies in our actions, not in wealth or power, but in how we treat one another. Safe travels. K.R."